All right, good afternoon. So today's Dig In Food Gardening series is all about making the most out of our growing season. So we're going to cover a lot of different ways that you can do that. We're going to talk about why that's important, and we're going to give you some tools to be more successful. So again, I thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to digging into this topic with you. So we are with University of Maryland Extension here in Garrett County, and we just want to be sure that our programs are being offered equally and accessibly to all. So we want to give you a minute to view our Injustice for All poster. If you have any questions about accommodations or need any more additional information, all that information can be found at the bottom of this poster. And today, I'm going to give you a quick introduction. My name is Ashley Bodkins, and I'm with University of Maryland Extension here in Garrett County. And Sarah Llewellyn, who is the Home Hort and Ag Agent in Allegheny County, helped to prepare these presentations. So I just wanted to reach out and give her credit for helping us get all of this session together. So why is season extension important? Why should we care? So that's just a fancy season extension is just a term that we use to try to make the most out of our growing season. So why is that important? And that's all because of our cold hardiness zone and where we're located here in Garrett County. So we're the westernmost county in Maryland. And as you can see, this is the older version. So they just redid, the United States Department of Agriculture just redid the cold hardiness zone map in the last couple years. So this is a little bit of an older version, which I think is probably a little more accurate. But if you go to this website, planthardiness.ars.usd.gov, you can put in your zip code to find out exactly what cold hardiness zone you are in. And again, this is going to be important because it's going to tell you a little bit more about when you're going to expect your last killing frost in the spring and when you could get your earliest killing frost in the fall. So again, between those time periods is when we can easily grow warm season crops. And that's going to be important as we talk about why we need to extend our growing season. So one of the tips that we can do to get more out of this short growing season, our spring frost free date, we tell everyone for Oakland is somewhere around June the 5th, or most people are planting their frost sensitive crops around Memorial Day weekend. That's usually when most people here are doing that. So we only really have the growing season of June, July, August, and maybe September. So that's really only 4 months, not a whole really long time to grow long season crops. So one thing that we can do is to plant multiple crops in the same place throughout the growing season. So we call this succession planting. And this is an example that we did in 2021 at my house. So we built this raised bed just to kind of experiment and see what we could do in one growing season. So we started with a really early spring cool season crop of potatoes. So we did that on April the 9th. We also did lettuce and spinach and onion sets. And you can see what it looks like about a month later in May, which again, this is still within too early to be planting warm season crops outside. So we're trying to get a jump on what we can get out. You can see the potatoes here in this upper quadrant. They actually got a little bit of frost damage on them. So you can kind of see how they're turning a little bit yellowish, but not enough to actually kill them. And it didn't hurt the overall crop. So you can kind of see that this is June, and we actually were able to harvest our first crop of potatoes on June 15th. So this is just one example of how you can utilize these early months of the growing season in April and May to really try to get some early things started. So what are cool season crops? So these are going to be plants that thrive in the cool weather. So they prefer temperatures 55 to 75. And a lot of times these crops are going to be ones that are most nutritious, right? They're most nutrient dense. So a lot of these can be planted very thickly per square foot. So that makes them easier to, get more out of a limited space. So things like kohlrabi, asparagus, which of course would be a perennial, lettuces, beets, cabbage, peas, radishes, and carrots. And even kale can be started very early. So these are a couple of charts that I've found to be very helpful. Again, the very hardy and hardy category would be what we would be looking at to maybe possibly overwinter or to plant pretty early in the season. So hopefully we're not going to be having any of these very, very hardy crop temperatures, -5 or, anything like that anymore this season, but you just never know. So again, some of these hardy crops, these are going to be your ideal plants for putting out into, the just outside right now in Garrett County. So things like cabbage, broccoli, they can take 20 degrees, Brussels sprouts, rutabagas, kale, and then mustards. And then the semi-hardy, these are going to be ones again with a little bit of care. And depending on the season overall, you might also be able to go ahead and put those out now too. So the things to remember with peas is the plant themselves, they can take 18 to 25 degrees, but the blossom is what's going to be killed, anything below 30. So kind of the goal with peas is that you want to have them up and growing, and the blossoms starting, sometime around the early of June, to make sure that we're not going to get those frost temperatures and kill those flowers. The other thing I wanted to point out again is that we have seedling emergence at particular temperatures. So every crop has a particular soil temperature that it prefers to germinate at. So you can see the crops are down the left-hand side. The soil temperatures are across the top. And then the number inside of each box is how many days it took for that plant to germinate at that particular soil temperature. So you can see a lot of our cool season crops, they will germinate at 50 degrees soil temperature, right? It might take them a little bit longer, but anytime we can get the soil temperatures up above 60, that's when they're really going to start to thrive, anywhere between 60 and 70. That's when they're going to be most happy. And if you want to track the soil temperature, you don't have to have your own soil thermometer. You can do it through this greencastonline.com soil tracking tool. You can just add your zip code onto this online model, and it will give you the average soil temperature for the last 5 days, for the last 24 hours. It'll even do it for months at a time. It'll give you the year's average, the 5-year average, and then the 10-year average, so you can kind of compare as to see what has been happening, historically in your particular area. So we talked about succession planting. That's a great way to make the most of our growing season. We've talked about using cool season crops. The second thing that you can do is to start your garden by using transplants. So this is a good way to get a jump on the growing season. Some plants can be started 6 to 8 weeks before they want to be put out. Those are a lot of our warm season crops, like our tomatoes and our peppers. And then, some other things can be 3 to 4 weeks ahead. So a lot of like cabbages and brassicas, they grow really, really quickly. So they may not need to be started quite as early. So transplanting is a great tool and something that I use every season to get the most out of the year. Talked a little bit about this last time, but if you don't know where to start with gardening, some guidance with transplants is you want to start your transplants for things that take a really long time to mature. So cabbage, broccoli, tomatoes, and peppers. Sometimes you may want to also start things for earlier harvest, like melons or cucumbers, maybe even squash and lettuce. Anything that's tall and skinny and that you plant a lot of at one time, those are usually going to be direct sowed, like beans, peas, corn, and okra. And anything that's a root crop isn't going to want to be transplanted. So a lot of your onions usually are going to be used like an onion set or an onion plant, or radishes or carrots or anything like that. You want to put those directly into your garden. We talked a lot about seed starting last week. And just a quick mention about warm season crops. So they obviously play a huge part in our production of gardens here in Garrett County, but they're going to be ones that are going to require long, hot days and warm soil temperatures to mature. So a lot of these are what I call my traditional garden vegetables. This is what most people think of when they think of vegetable gardening. So beans, corn, cucumbers, eggplants, okra, peppers. pumpkin, squash, and tomatoes. And we did a virtual growing season series a couple years ago, so you can visit all those archived on our Western Maryland Extension YouTube channel. So as we move on along through what else we can do to extend our season, we're going to talk a little bit about structures. So I have these arranged from least expensive to most expensive to kind of give you an idea of how to better utilize these tools. So floating row cover is one way that's very cost effective that you can, again, protect some of your plants from early season or late season frost. So it has different thicknesses available, but depending on, hold on a second here, we're gonna pause just a second. Got some drawing going on over the screen, so I want to try to clear that. Okay, well, give me 1 second here. All right, sorry about that. So again, floating row cover is a way that we can extend our season and protect our plants from those early or late season frosts. So you can get different weights or thicknesses. Most of it's somewhere like $1 a foot, depending on how wide it is. It can also be used to protect from flying insects. So if we think about a lot of our pests on our brassica plants, so like the flying cabbage white butterfly, the imported cabbage moth that lays its eggs on our, brassicas. So whether that's your kale or your broccoli or your cabbage or your cauliflower, all those plants um, that don't need to be pollinated, you can put this floating row cover on the day that you transplant them. So it's also going to protect from the frost, but also from allowing any of those flying insects to land on there and lay their eggs. So it kind of has multiple ways that people use it in their application. But again, when I was growing up, we would always just use old blankets or something like that. So this is kind of the new way of doing that through this product. And then you can create low tunnels. So again, this is just a way of creating a micro environment within a smaller area of your growing space to then be able to put, certain crops that are going to thrive in there. So this is an example of how we did it over our raised bed back in 2021. We just got PVC pipe and we used rebar, drove the rebar into the ground and then stuck the PVC pipe down over top of it, and it has stayed perfectly in place for a couple years. We did use some like hoops or pipe clamps just with some screws at each corner to kind of hold it in place. You can also use wire, and you don't even necessarily have to have a pretty hoop structure. You can just lay that floating row cover over top of the plants and it'll do just fine. So again, some people use these smaller low tunnels. Some people call them caterpillar tunnels. You can kind of see why inside of other structures, again, to help extend the amount of time that we can plant plants. These are sandbags that are holding it down in this middle example. I've also just used like plastic or metal landscape staples to do the exact same thing. And here's some more in-depth pictures of how we did this low tunnel construction. Again, I just used a landscape stable at the end and pushed it down into there. We were also trying square foot gardening, so we just did these 1 foot grids with twine to kind of try that method of gardening, which is very interesting because it's very high input in the amount of plants you put into a really small area. But it helps you to focus your energy on a small area, and it really can be very productive. So the next type of season extension tool that we have is a cold frame. So this has one heat source. It's just a structure, usually with a glass or clear lid to let the sunlight energy in. And again, it's just going to help protect from those late season frosts. But it can be limiting depending on what the weather actually is that season. And then we have hotbeds. So this is actually a structure that I learned about when we took gardening in 4-H, which was kind of fun. So my brother and I kind of started our horticulture adventure with the hotbed that we learned about in his 4-H gardening book. So it's just usually a wooden structure and it has glass on top of it. In the bottom of it, you put manure, like composted animal manure, usually chicken, horse, or cow. We always just did cow. And as that manure starts to decompose and become composted, it produces heat, which helps to heat up your soil profile. So in this growing system, the plants are getting two sources of heat, one from the bottom from the soil, and then also sunlight radiation. So it can really be very helpful. We were always able to start all of our warm season crops usually around the beginning of April. So we had plenty of plants to put into our warm season traditional vegetable garden in June. And then we have greenhouses. So greenhouses are the most expensive option for extending your growing operation. So it's just going to be a structure that's enclosed typically with glass, plastic, or fiberglass. And again, you're just creating more of a microclimate within that area. Most greenhouses are going to cost somewhere around $15 to $20 per square foot to build. And then with the greenhouse, you not only have the sunlight energy, you often have some other heat source. So heaters, whether it's natural gas, propane, something like that, that's going to also provide heat. So you can get the maximum amount of greenhouse growing time with these structures. These structures, again, are going to be what a lot of people have. They're going to be small. In a traditional greenhouse, you're usually going to plant plants into containers, and then the containers can be moved, inside or outside. And you can definitely get, depending on what heat source you have and what your budget is, you can gain several months of growing season with the greenhouse. So the last type of structure I'm going to talk about quickly is a high tunnel. So these are not more expensive than greenhouses, but they tend to be becoming a lot more. You're seeing a lot of them around. There was a lot of funding through the Natural Resources Conservation Service the last several years to help more people get into growing backyard fruits and vegetables. So we see a lot of these structures going up. So they're relatively inexpensive, somewhere around $3 to $6 per square foot, excluding the labor to build them. And the purpose of the high tunnel, again, is to create these early season microclimates so that you can get your crops in the ground without fear of frost. There's usually only one heat source with the high tunnel, and that would be the sunlight energy. And you're directly planting most of the time into the soil, just like you would a traditional in-ground garden. Some tunnels are actually movable, so they have tracks so that they can start at one end of your property and kind of move along the track. I don't see very many of those here, just because of our extreme weather patterns. They would be hard to secure throughout the growing season when you're not using it. So this is an example of my high tunnel. So again, it gives me about a month and a half to 2 months of frost protection, depending on the season itself. So you can kind of see this is June 5th, which is our traditional frost-free date for Garrett County, where I live. And you can kind of see that I already have warm season crops. These are tomatoes that we're starting to trellis all the way up. So they're already, 2.5 feet tall here. You can see we have broccoli and cauliflower here on the other side of the tunnel that's already, really well taken off and ready to start producing the next couple weeks. I'm just going to show you a few more. Again, this is that same time frame. We have tomatoes, again, that are a very cold sensitive crop. already starting to bloom and produce their tendrils that are going to start to crawl up those twines. And then June 17th, so again, nobody without some sort of season extension is going to have cucumbers and this large of tomatoes this early without, doing a lot of extra work. Then just a few more pictures. This is July, so our tomatoes have already, reached probably 5 to 6 feet tall in the tunnel, and they're just going to keep crawling through the rest of the growing season. So again, this is an example of how you can do multiple crops, the succession planting. So after we planted cauliflower and broccoli early in the season, and then after that we planted pole beans and sunflowers. That's just an example of what we've done in the past. So other additional things that you may need to add to your garden, which are considered season extensions, so things like shade cloth over your growing structure. This can help make an environment that's a little bit cooler and less intense. So if you want to keep things like lettuce and spinach growing further into the season, it can make them a lot happier. Plastic culture is one that most people think of as just for weed control. But once you make these beds, so you're making the soil more three-dimensional, it will warm the soil up a little bit faster. So crops grown with black plastic mulch, they can usually be as far as 7 to 21 days earlier than those just grown in bare ground. There are always benefits, negative things that come from every opportunity, it seems like. So some of the benefits, again, it's earlier production. You have less wind and soil erosion. It helps to keep the water where it's supposed to be. The major disadvantage to plastic culture is what do you do with it, right? It can very rarely be used more than one season. So then you have to figure out what to do with that product whenever you're done with it. And it can be really hard to pull up. Especially if you have weeds that are growing through it, or if soil has washed over top of it or something like that. Paper mulch is an easy way to provide similar benefits to the plastic mulch, and it helps to dispose of recyclable paper because it is biodegradable. So I've used plastic or newspaper, I'm sorry, underneath mulch for years and years in my flower bed and my ornamental beds as just a great way to help keep weeds down. But again, it's still allowing your mulch and everything to have a conversation with those soil microbes. You can also consider your planting site. So again, sites with a southern exposure and south-facing slope are going to help increase the earliness of a lot of your crops because they're going to get more sunshine earlier in the year. You can also think about windbreaks. So where can you plant on your property that's going to be protected? So maybe that's near a building, near another structure. It could even be different types of vegetation that you leave grow. So there was some research done with the rye, which is a pretty tall cereal grain, where they left these 3-foot strips of rye to help protect young season vegetables from other types of wind and precipitation to start the season a little bit earlier. And then, of course, there's variety selection. So again, this is a really easy way that gardeners can study those early arriving seed catalogs and think about what do you really want to get out of your growing season. Anytime we can get cultivars and varieties that are shorter in length, but still produce a crop, that can be very helpful. So instead of choosing, potentially like cantaloupes that are 120 days to maturity, pick a cantaloupe that's going to be shorter, like 90 days to maturity. That's going to help make sure that you can get your crop within the amount of time that we have. And then just the last thought I had is that you're often going to use more than one technique in your operation to be sure that you can get crops earlier and throughout the season. So I'll use multiple techniques. I use varieties for sure. I always am looking for varieties that mature quickly. And then I will use transplants. So I'll start my plants as early as possible to make sure that there's a nice, large, healthy plant going out into the garden outside whenever the season is right. We do succession planting, again, planting multiple crops in one place. And then I use a greenhouse, a high tunnel, and plastic mulch to help extend my growing season. So if you're looking for additional resources, you can subscribe to the Maryland Grows blog. It is written by extension professionals across University of Maryland. So it's a great way to get good information in a timely manner. You can go in and search the archives, select month. You can search by topic, and it'll give you lots of great tidbits of information that you can use. Don't forget to join us weekly for the Master Gardener Minute. We post those every Monday on the Allegheny County Master Gardener Facebook page, and we try to give you information in less than 2 minutes. And our next topic, which I forgot to update this slide, we do the Master Gardener Minute Extended the first Thursday of each month. So our next one is going to be on May the 1st, and that is only virtually on our Facebook pages, Allegheny and Garrett County Master Gardener Facebook page. So in May, we're going to be talking about healthy plants for your garden. So that's going to include tips for visiting the garden center, and also what you want to look for when you're looking at plants when you go visit your garden center or when you're trying to grow your own. All right, with that, if there's any questions, we can enter them in the chat. Otherwise, we will see you on April 25th for information about permaculture, perennial food crops, and some easy small fruits that you can add to your garden.